Usually around feast time, I deal with the dietary law because the Lord set a dietary law in motion. And actually, it did not start in Leviticus. That's what most people think it started. But if you go all the way back to Genesis, the Lord talked about the clean animals and the unclean animals. So apparently there was some type of dietary law even in effect then. Even though the Bible didn't go into any detail, but if the Lord said clean animals and unclean animals, that meant that the people had to know what was clean and people had to know what was unclean,
Yes, sir.
right? He couldn't just say clean and unclean and not tell them what's clean and what's unclean. So apparently, the dietary law was even in effect then. But as I said, usually around this time, just before feast time, I always like to do this lesson because I like to try and keep our feast as clean as possible. Today, I'm also going to deal a little bit with the cleanliness law as well because God had a cleanliness law, and I do not read anywhere in the Bible where it was done away with. I can't read it. I know some people don't really acknowledge it, and they say you can't keep it to the letter, so why bother at all? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Those same people probably are not keeping the dietary law to the letter either. Because if you don't, if you eat in a restaurant, or if you don't produce your own food, then you're probably not keeping the dietary law absolutely to the letter anyway. You go in a restaurant and you order steak, and they set that steak on that grill. It's a real good chance, it wasn't too long ago, they set a pork chop on that grill. And according to the scripture, what you are supposed to do, you are supposed to clean it, break it down, clean it, and it's supposed to remain unclean until evening.
Yes, sir.
And then you can go and cook your steak on that. But I tell you what, you walk in a restaurant and say, well, look here, I want a steak, but I think you cooked a pork chop on that not too long ago. What you need to do is break this thing down and clean it, and I'll come back after sundown to get my steak, and he going to show you which way to go is. But you know what you're going to do? You're going to sit right there and beat on that counter until they bring your steak. As soon as they get there with it, you're going to gobble it down as fast as you can. So that's why I said if you eat in restaurants or if you don't produce your own food, you're not keeping the dietary law absolutely to the letter either. So now if you're going to throw out the cleanliness law because you say you can't keep it absolutely to the letter, then you need to throw out the dietary law as well. But they ain't going to do that. You understand what I'm saying? So that is just an excuse to just disregard some of God's laws. But I understand clearly that it is difficult, if not impossible, in this society to keep it to the letter. But I always say, why not make an effort anyway?
That's
you
right.
Understand what
That's
I'm saying?
right,
I'd
brother.
rather stand before the Lord and say, well, I made an effort
Yes,
anyway.
sir.
And to stand before the Lord and say, I just decided I couldn't keep it to the letter, so I threw it in the garbage. Which you didn't throw in the garbage. I threw it in the garbage. So now, we're going to deal a little bit with that as well. We're going to show you what makes a person unclean. But now, the first thing we're going to do to start this lesson out is we're going to show you what laws it is that the Lord nailed to the cross. Because when you start talking about the laws, then you have people want to say the law of Moses, first of all. And it was not Moses' law. None of the laws were Moses' law. It was always the Lord speaking unto Moses and telling Moses what to tell the people.
That's right.
So it was God's law that he gave to Moses for Moses to give to the people. Then another cop-out is they said, well, Jesus came and he nailed it to the cross. Well, Jesus did nail a law to the cross, and we're going to show you at the very start of this lesson what laws it is that he nailed to the cross. We're going to start this lesson out in Leviticus chapter 4, and we'll begin reading at verse 1. Leviticus 4, we're going to pick it up at verse 1. So we're going to just show you, first of all, before we get into the dietary law, before we get into the cleanliness law, we're going to show you what laws it is that the Lord nailed to the cross, because he made it very clear what laws it is that he nailed to the cross. Let's start reading at Leviticus chapter 4, and we'll begin at verse 1. Leviticus 4, and we'll begin at verse 1. 4 and 1. 4 and 1. Okay, get it? Go ahead and read.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying.
Now, it is always the Lord that is speaking unto Moses. Now, we're going to deal a little bit here with the animal sacrifice law. And even with the animal sacrifice law, it was always the Lord speaking unto Moses and telling Moses what to tell the people. That is the same way it was with God's moral law, same way it was with God's dietary law, same way it was with God's cleanliness law. It was always the Lord speaking unto Moses. But with the moral law, the Lord first came down and stood on the Mount Sinai and spoke to him himself. If you go back to Exodus chapter 20, the Lord came down, stood on Mount Sinai, and spoke directly to the people. Everybody heard him. Later on, he wrote it on 2 tables of stone and gave it to Moses and told Moses to give it unto the people. So it was never from Moses. It was always from the Lord. Go ahead and continue reading.
Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them, if the priest that
now, he said, now, if a soul sin against any of the commandments of the Lord, that is what sin is, whether you're an Old Testament Christian, Old Testament saint, or a New Testament Christian, sin is always a transgression of the law. You know, John said it very clearly in the 3rd chapter of John, whosoever transgresseth the law committeth sin, for sin is the transgression of the law. That's in the New Testament, in case you didn't know it. Right. Now he's telling you here in the Old Testament, if a soul sin against any of the commandments of the Lord and be found